At last, the GOP has finally unveiled their long-awaited Obamacare replacement, or at least one of them. This is one of several bills that's actually floating around, but this is actually getting major attention. Now, this plan is called the American Health Care Act. Well, who would be against the American Health Care Act? I love their Orwellian naming on this. Like, just like they name everything, American or freedom or whatever. Well, we're going to break down and see whether or not it covers all Americans. Now, according to the New York Times, this is one of the two bills, actually, drafted by separate House committees. The government would no longer, and this is getting into specifics of this bill, it would no longer have a individual mandate. So already getting into the policy details, that individual mandate, gone. Okay. So individual mandate, of course, that would make a lot of people happy. A lot of people are very, very angry about the individual mandate. They're like, hey, we don't want to be forced to pay for health insurance, especially health insurance that we might not need. Well, I've explained it on the show before that you would have some issues if you eliminate the individual mandate, and I've explained that in other videos. Now, what this would also do is that this bill would allow insurers to impose a surcharge of 30% for those people who have a gap between their health care plans. Well, that's a little bit of a disaster, because basically what they're saying is that if you drop coverage for any reason, or if you are dropped from an insurance company plan and are not covered for any point in time during the year and apply for new insurance, well, these companies by law would be able to charge you 30% extra for just signing up for insurance. Well, that seems a little disastrous, especially for those who might have lost their insurance through no fault of their own, such as being not able to afford the premiums for a specific insurance plan or company. I mean, because right now, and then if this gets enacted into law, well, insurance companies will be able to jack up their rates at any time they want to. And as we know, one of the big problems with the ACA, and even before the ACA, is rising rates for premiums. Well, now, if you try to get an insurance plan with a lower rate, if you couldn't afford your rate before, well, you're going to get hit with that 30% surcharge. So that's a disaster. Now, the legislation would also preserve two of the most popular features of Obamacare. Now, what is that? Well, one of them is letting young adults stay in their parents' health plan until age 26. And also, they did leave in the preexisting conditions clause of that. So, insurance companies cannot drop you for having a pre-existing condition. You have to have coverage. You can't be denied. Now, interestingly enough, inside of this healthcare plan, for some reason, they decided to go after Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood? What the hell? What this would do is that it would make Planned Parenthood ineligible for Medicaid reimbursements or federal planning grants. So immediately, right in here, I mean, it's sort of unrelated. We're going to stick something in here that goes after Planned Parenthood. Because fuck you, that's why. Fascinating. Now, what it also does is that it lifts taxes that Obamacare had imposed on wealthy people, insurers, and prescription drug manufacturers, and replaces the subsidies for a tax credit that benefits younger, healthier people, and will actually raise premiums for people who are older. Make no mistake, this bill actually hoses the elderly. And so let me get into the specifics here. Now, under Obamacare, insurers could only charge elderly people 3 times more than younger policyholders. This bill, however, would widen that band from 3-to-1 to 5-to-1, meaning that, as an example, adults aged 60 to 64 would actually see their annual premiums go up by an average of 22%, or nearly $3,200, to nearly $18,000, according to a study by the Millman Actuarial Firm on behalf of the AARP. Now, those in their 50s would be hit with a 13% increase, or just $1,500, and pay an annual premium of $12,800. So immediately, you have older people, 50s and their 60s, getting hosed by this. Well, you're going to have to pay more. Fascinating. It's interesting because you have a lot of GOP voters that are actually older. So now, not only that, but the GOP plan doesn't provide those same people as generous of tax credits as Obamacare did. For example, a 60-year-old making $40,000 would get about $4,000 from the Republican plan in tax credits, not as a subsidy. Now, what they got before in the ACA, they got an average subsidy of $6,750, according to the same Kaiser study. Now, the plan also, in addition to going after old people, also goes after poor people. According to CNN Money, the American Health Care Act would end the enhanced federal Medicaid funding for new enrollees starting in the year of 2020. Now, those already in the program, they say, could stay in as long as they remain continuously insured. But if they're dropped at all from the Medicaid plan, you cannot re-enroll. So once you're out, you're out. You're done. Now, that essentially means the end of the Medicaid expansion as we know it. And of course, there are a lot of GOP governors in certain states, Ohio, for example, that are going, whoa, 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 no, hey, whoa, you guys, you should not get rid of Medicaid. I mean, Ohio Governor John Kasich is one of the most fervent proponents of the Medicaid expansion because, look, Medicaid expansion essentially means that right now, the government pays about 100% of Medicaid cost to the states. Now, that was scheduled to go down to 90%. But ultimately, it's a really, really good deal for the states. And now, Donald Trump, under Trumpcare, saying, nope, let's get rid of that. Like, no, we're not going to get any. We're going to get some federal funding to the states, but not nearly as much. So your Medicaid program, we're not going to fund that anymore to the tune that we've been funding it. And I'll get to that in a minute. Now, the problem is, of course, what you have here, in addition to the end of the Medicaid expansion, which, as I said, a lot of GOP governors are actually against, the ones that have actually expanded Medicaid into their states, you also have the way that they fund Medicaid being changed. And you know what that means? They're going to change it into a block grant. Basically, what's going to happen is that the states are going to end up paying for what the block grant doesn't cover. That means you're going to have a lot of cuts. You're going to have a lot of people drop from the Medicaid rolls. Now, Medicaid right now serves about 70,000 people across the country. And these are in states that have expanded Medicaid. There are a lot of states that are under Republican rule that would not expand Medicaid to the poor. So right now, you're seeing 70,000 people that are going to be dropped. So absolute disaster. This is, of course, is going to hurt poor adults, low-income children, women, senior citizens, and the disabled. So again, if you're poor, if you're old, you are getting screwed over by this. Basically, everybody that the GOP isn't interested in helping anyway gets fucked. Now, in other videos, I've talked about what would happen if you eliminate the individual mandate and the taxes on the wealthy that fund the subsidies. Because again, the individual mandate helped pay for some of the other stuff. It's interesting to note that this was released without any sort of analysis or scoring by the CBO. Meaning, they don't know how to pay for the stuff that actually is in there. They don't know how to pay for these tax credits. Very, very interesting. And actually very, very telling. Now, let's talk about the subsidies or the tax credits, right? Now, basically, this would eliminate the subsidies and replace it with a less generous tax credit based on not age, but on income alone. For example, somebody making $20,000 a year would end up taking the biggest hit on any age under the GOP plan. A recent Kaiser study found that a 27-year-old would only get $2,000 instead of $3,225 under Obamacare on average, while a 40-year-old would get about $3,000 versus nearly $4,150 under the ACA. So again, what you're doing is that you're sticking it to the poor and old people. Ironically, older people, as I mentioned, tend to vote more Republican, and if that passes, they're going to be the ones that see the sharpest increases in premiums and even less help from the government. Now, the reason, of course, that older people get so much help under the ACA is because older people get sicker and their treatments become more expensive and medications. And it's also why healthier, younger people were needed in the health insurance market to help pay for this. That's why we needed the mandate. This law, of course, completely upends the whole thing because now more benefits go to younger people. And I'm going to lay those out. In fact, people in their 20s are the biggest winners here in this Republican plan. So long, of course, as you're not poor. Enrollees aged to 20 to 29 would save about $700 a year to $4,000 on average, according to the Millman study for the AARP. Those under 30 would actually get a refundable tax credit of up to $2,000 to offset the cost of their premiums, as long as their income does not exceed $215,000 for an individual, which most younger people, they're not making $215,000 a year unless you're like Mark fucking Zuckerberg or something. And the GOP tax credits will also likely be more generous than Obamacare subsidies for younger people. For example, a 27-year-old making $40,000 a year would receive $2,000 under the GOP plan, but only gets a $103 subsidy from Obamacare on average. And since this bill loosens regulations on what could be considered insurance, i.e. the return of cheap junk insurance plans, means that healthier people will have the option of saving more money by buying insurance that doesn't really cover anything. It's basically insurance in name only. Now, for a younger person who doesn't really give a fuck, that might seem smart. Hey, I'm going to save some money. All right, I'm going to be covered. I'm going to save some money. Fantastic. It's smart until, I don't know, something happens, like you get sick or, get cancer or something. And then you're like, oh, fuck. I didn't realize this insurance covered dick. It's almost like wearing a fig leaf instead of pants. I didn't know it didn't cover my cock. You mean it's been hanging out there the whole time? I didn't notice. It was cheaper. So that's a disaster. So it might seem like it benefits younger people this way, but it actually doesn't. It's actually not good comprehensive insurance. So that's a problem. But of course, Republicans are like, well, hey, man, that's a risk. Hey, if you get sick or cancer, you're on your own, dude. Trumpcare. USA, USA, USA. Now, it's also not going to be any surprise to anybody who watches the show and pays attention to what's going on to see that higher income Americans will also benefit greatly from this law. I already mentioned that taxes on the wealthy would be used to, or that were used to fund the subsidies, are no longer part of this bill, being replaced, of course, by tax credits. But one of the reasons that I mentioned earlier that CBO didn't score this is because, well, I mean, they didn't have time before they released it, but also it's going to probably get a negative score because they don't know how to pay for the tax subsidies that they're going to give everyone else. Because they just got rid of the taxes on the rich. They're not part of this. For example, nearly everybody in the top 1% who earn more than $774,000 a year would actually get a very hefty tax cut, averaging about $33,000, according to the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center. Those in the 0.1% would get an average tax cut of $197,000. Not only that, but there's the addition of health savings accounts. Now, health savings accounts, of course, will allow people to put money away for their health insurance expenses tax-free. Well, who does that benefit? That benefits very wealthy people who are able to put this money into these accounts in the first place. Now, of course, poor people and, middle-class people, regular people, everybody will have access to a health savings account. The same access as a wealthy person. However, having access to something doesn't necessarily mean that you can have it. Doesn't necessarily mean that you can afford it or do anything about it. So that's the issue. A rich person could probably put away like $100,000 a month or whatever, a couple of months, and be fine. If they they get cancer, well, they have all that money put away tax-free. Somebody who's middle class, somebody who's poor, might only be able to afford to put $50 away a month or a week into their health savings account. And then the same thing happens to them. They get cancer. They are 100% and completely royally fucked. So that's what's going on here. I mean, yes, just because you have access to something does not mean that you can use it or afford it. Again, I have access to a Maserati. It doesn't mean I can fucking drive one. Doesn't mean I can afford it. And of course, finally, this law is another big giveaway to health insurance companies. Now, let me explain. Obamacare allowed insurance companies to deduct $500,000 of their executive pay as a business expense. Basically like, oh, well, I gave our CEO, $3 million in compensation because they did such a fantastic job. I can deduct about $500,000 and consider that a business expense. Fantastic. Now, the GOP bill, however, would eliminate that limitation. Basically, if Aetna pays their CEO millions of dollars, $3 million in executive compensation, this bill would allow that company to try to deduct that from their tax bill. That, in effect, when you think about it, is a subsidy from us to Aetna. We would essentially be paying in our taxes, because they would not be paying their taxes, for their CEO bonus. And that's what's going on here. So, look, what we know now from this plan is that if you are young, you are healthy, and you are wealthy, or you're an insurance corporation, because corporations are people, well, you're going to be doing very, very well under this particular plan. Now, there are some Republicans that are looking at this, and this is one of them is Rand Paul, who said, whoa, this plan sucks because you're too generous with your tax breaks. You are too generous. So this is what's happening. Disaster, man. You are not winning with the American Health Care Act. Unless, of course, you are one of those very, very wealthy, very privileged, very young people. In that case, you are winning very, very much with this plan. And if you're not, sad day for you. Trumpcare. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.